It's the dry season on the Serengeti. Two male lions, strangers to the resident pride, are walking toward it with a very simple goal. They're hungry, they're exhausted, and they want territory. Grass, water, shade, access to females, that's it, real estate. But within about 72 hours of taking over the pride, they begin hunting down every cub too young to escape. Not because the cubs attack them, not because they're angry, and not because they're simply bloodthirsty. They kill the cubs because nursing lionesses don't ovulate. As long as a mother is raising young, she won't become fertile again. To the new males, those cubs are standing between them and their own future offspring. Remove the cubs, and the females return to breeding condition within days or weeks. The lions came looking for land. What they created was a mass grave and a new mating opportunity. But here's the part almost nobody thinks about. Those lions have absolutely no idea whose cubs they're killing. They didn't run a DNA test. They couldn't if they wanted to. No wild animal can look at an infant and know for certain, that's mine. And yet, throughout the animal kingdom, males constantly make life or death decisions based on fatherhood. Sometimes they protect, sometimes they ignore, sometimes they kill, all without ever truly knowing. Which raises one of evolution's strangest questions. How can an animal decide whether a baby is its own when certainty is impossible? The answer isn't DNA, it isn't memory, and it isn't intelligence. It's something far older, a collection of ancient shortcuts that work just often enough for evolution to keep them around. To understand those shortcuts, we have to begin with one of the strangest discoveries ever made in animal behavior. The mouse that changed its mind. In 1959, a scientist named Hilda Bruce noticed something extraordinary while studying laboratory mice. A newly pregnant female mouse would sometimes lose her pregnancy without being injured, without becoming sick, and without anything physically happening to the embryos. The trigger was simply the smell of a strange male. If the scent belonged to the male she had already mated with, nothing happened. But if it belonged to an unfamiliar male, her body often terminated the pregnancy. The embryos were reabsorbed, her hormones reset. Within a short time, she became fertile again. Today, scientists call this phenomenon the Bruce effect. And despite sounding almost like science fiction, it has been observed in multiple mammals. What's remarkable isn't just what happens, it's why. Think about the situation from the female's perspective. A strange male suddenly appears. In many mammals, new males often kill infants they almost certainly didn't father. If she continues this pregnancy, she may spend weeks or months investing energy into offspring that could be killed the moment they're born. From an evolutionary perspective, that's an enormous loss. So instead, her body makes a brutal calculation. Better to stop now and produce offspring with the new dominant male. Those future babies are far more likely to survive. It sounds heartless, but evolution doesn't reward hope. It rewards success. The Bruce effect isn't kindness. It isn't cruelty. It's insurance. And that tells us something incredibly important. The female is already behaving as though a new male represents danger to her future offspring, which means long before scientists discovered the Bruce effect, there must already have been tremendous evolutionary pressure pushing females toward that response. That pressure had a name, infanticide, not as an accident, not as a mistake, but as a strategy. And to understand how that strategy evolved, we have to leave the laboratory behind and travel to the rocky hills of Western India, because that's where one scientist watched a series of events that completely changed how biologists think about fatherhood. And it all started with a troop of monkeys. The monkeys that changed everything. In the early 1970s, anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy spent years studying Hanuman langurs in the hills around Mount Abu, India. Langurs live in family groups. Usually there's one dominant male, several females, and their infants. Everything appears peaceful until a challenger arrives. A younger, stronger male drives the resident male away, takes over the troop, and almost immediately, the infants begin dying. The newcomer hunts them down one by one. For years, scientists dismissed these killings. Maybe the monkeys were overcrowded. Maybe humans feeding them had changed their behavior. Maybe it was simply abnormal violence. Hrdy proposed something far more disturbing. The killings weren't accidents. They weren't mistakes. They were an evolutionary strategy. Here's why. A female langur. Nursing an infant isn't fertile. Sometimes she won't ovulate again for more than a year. A new dominant male rarely keeps control forever. Another challenger could overthrow him in only a few years. Every month, those existing infants continue nursing is another month he cannot produce offspring of his own, and those infants almost certainly belonged to the male he just defeated. From an evolutionary perspective, the calculation becomes brutally simple. Remove the infants. The mothers stop nursing, their fertility returns. He mates. His own offspring are born before another rival arrives. It's horrifying, but it follows a cold logic. The strategy survived because, over countless generations, it produced more descendants than simply waiting. The impossible problem. But there's a flaw, a huge one. What if he's wrong? What if one of those infants actually is his? Perhaps he mated with the female before taking over. Perhaps she conceived earlier than expected. Perhaps he simply lost track. If he kills his own offspring, he has made the single worst mistake evolution allows. He's erased his own genetic future. So the real evolutionary challenge was never kill infants. It was kill infants that aren't yours. And suddenly we're back to the same impossible question. How can any animal know when knowing is impossible? Evolution's simplest shortcut. The answer isn't certainty, it's probability. Evolution didn't solve the problem by teaching males who their children are. It solved it with a shortcut. A surprisingly simple one. If a male mated with a female around the time she conceived, treat the offspring as his. If he didn't, assume they aren't. That's it. No DNA, no facial resemblance, no memory of birth, just timing. Mating becomes a stand-in for fatherhood. A proxy. Think about those lions again. When the two new males arrive at the pride, they know one thing with complete confidence. They weren't there months earlier. They never mated with these females when the existing cubs were conceived. According to the shortcut, those cubs are not theirs. So the shortcut produces exactly the behavior evolution built it for. The cubs die. Months later, new cubs are born. Those cubs appeared after the new males gained mating access. Now the shortcut flips. Protect them, defend them, raise them. The lions aren't recognizing their own children. They're recognizing the timing of their own mating history and assuming the babies match. A guess disguised as certainty. This is the astonishing part. Almost every major example of paternal care or paternal violence rests on the same fragile foundation. A guess, not perfect knowledge. Just a statistical shortcut that worked often enough over millions of years. And the moment you realize males are relying on a guess, another question appears. What if someone learns how to manipulate that guess? Because if fatherhood depends on mating access, then whoever controls mating controls the information. And that's exactly what females began doing. Across the animal kingdom, they evolved ways to blur, confuse, and sometimes completely rewrite the very clues males depend on. It's one of the cleverest evolutionary counterattacks ever discovered, and it changes the story completely. The female countermove. Once you understand that males aren't recognizing offspring, but simply guessing based on mating access, the next part almost becomes inevitable. If males are using a shortcut, that shortcut can be manipulated. And across millions of years, that's exactly what females evolved to do. One of the biggest examples is concealed ovulation. In many mammals, a female's fertile period is obvious. Males can see it. They know exactly when conception is likely. But in many primates, and famously in humans, ovulation is largely hidden. There's no reliable signal announcing now is the fertile window. That uncertainty changes everything. Because if a male can't pinpoint conception, he also can't be completely sure which offspring are his. Some species go even further. Instead of mating with just one male, a female mates with several during her fertile period. To us, that might seem chaotic. To evolution, it's brilliant. Every male now passes the same simple test. Did I mate with her when conception might have happened? For several males, the answer becomes maybe, and maybe is incredibly powerful. A male who thinks an infant might be his is much less likely to kill it. The cost of making the wrong decision is simply too high. So by creating uncertainty, the female protects her offspring. She isn't confusing the males by accident. She's turning their own shortcut into her shield. The birds that keep score now travel to England. Behavioral ecologist Nick Davies spent years studying a small brown bird called the dunnock. At first glance, it's one of the least impressive birds you'll ever see, but its family life is astonishing. Some dunnocks form simple pairs. Others live with one female and two males. Sometimes even more complicated arrangements appear. Davies noticed something fascinating. The amount of food a male brought back to the nest depended on one thing. Not the number of chicks, not how loudly they begged, not whether they looked like him. It depended on how much mating access he had with the female. A male that had mated frequently worked tirelessly. He fed the chicks again and again and again. Another male who believed his chances of fatherhood were lower reduced his effort, not completely, just enough to match his confidence. He's not recognizing his own offspring, he's betting. The more likely he thinks he is to be the father, the more energy he's willing to invest. Some females appear to understand this perfectly. By allowing several males to mate, they sometimes recruit multiple helpers to feed the same brood. Each male believes some of these chicks could be mine, so each contributes. The male thinks he's protecting his own genes. genes. The female is quietly building a bigger workforce. They're both using the same shortcut, just in completely different ways. A world built on guesses by now. A pattern should be emerging. The Bruce effect is a guess made before birth. Infanticide is a guess made violently. Parental care is a guess made hopefully. Every one of these behaviors exists because certainty is impossible. No lion knows, no langur knows, no dunnock knows. They act on probability, not proof, and that turns out to be enough. Evolution doesn't reward perfection. It rewards strategies that succeed more often than they fail. If a shortcut works most of the time, natural selection keeps it, even if it occasionally produces terrible mistakes.